Hello and welcome to the episode of the Manufacturing Leaders Podcast with me, Mark Bracknall, Managing Director of Theo James Recruitment. Today we're welcoming on Gareth Kane, the MD of Terra Infirma. Gareth is a sustainability and net zero expert, ex-university lecturer, and someone who now goes into lots of different businesses, including manufacturing and engineering firms, to talk about sustainability. What I loved about this episode, now I've done quite a few episodes now on the topic of net zero and sustainability. This was, yes, we talked about specific changes in your business and changes you can make tomorrow. And this is definitely an episode where you're going to take a lot of that away. However, at the core of this episode, it was all about leadership and transformational change. What Gareth has realized during his research and working with companies is that change has to come from the top. So he works with senior leaders within businesses to make sure that change happen. Something we talked about in a bit of a snippet of the episode was actually the importance of understanding why sustainability or any form of change like that in your business is important. And that will be different for each and every business. It's unique and authentic to you. And he goes through an exercise which is really crucial to do to make sure you as a business understand what that is before you even start to make any change. So it was a really fascinating, really interesting episode, which you're going to take a lot away. I certainly did. So please sit back and enjoy the episode. As ever, please do me the honor of clicking that like and subscribe to help grow the show. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the episode. A massive warm welcome today to Gareth Kane, the MD of Terra Infirma, and also fellow podcast host of the Net Zero Business Podcast. So how are you doing, Gareth? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing great. Thanks very much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Me too, absolutely. And loads to get into. But first question is the same question I ask everyone, which is, what does it mean to you to be a leader?
Well, in my field of work, sustainability, I always say that leadership is the difference between the best and the rest. And the reason why is the decisions required to hit a target like, net zero by 20 whenever, or, cutting your carbon footprint in half or more, are absolutely huge. And they can't be made at the middle management level, and they certainly can't be made at the sort of volunteer sustainability champion level, where a lot of people will try and make change happen. And so much so that in 2010, I realized that companies were struggling trying to do it at a middle management level, and it was becoming a leadership issue. And that's why I wrote my second book, The Green Executive, because I was being invited into boardrooms and I thought, well, I better get some models and things together so I know what to say to these, C-suite type executives. And there weren't any. So I had to produce my own, and I decided to write a book about it. So that was my second book, The Green Executive, which, even though it was published 16 years ago, it still sells about 100 copies a year. So I'm proud of that.
Yeah, it should be. It's interesting because I think any change in any business has to come from the top, isn't it? It has to. But yeah. Did you notice then a trend where leaders in the business, owners of the business, would almost pass this issue to their middle management and said, this is a problem, go and fix it, but then sort of step back? Was that what you were seeing?
Absolutely. And a lot of organizations were trying to manage this through ISO 14001. Now, ISO 14001, by definition, is incremental. You set targets and you try and improve on them every year. There's nothing about transformational change in ISO 14001. Sorry, people who don't know, that's environmental management standard, I should probably say. It's the green equivalent to ISO 9001 quality standard. And this just wasn't working because you can only squeeze so much out of the system before you have to change the system. So then it becomes a leadership issue because you're making those larger changes. And I think about 2010, that's when the penny was starting to drop for a lot of organizations, that you can't really just say, okay, we're going to keep reducing our carbon footprint by 2%, because after a few years, you run out of 2%.
Yeah.
And when I was writing The Green Executive, I reached out to a lot of people who were doing it better for case studies. And Diageo, the drinks company, sprang to mind, because when they ran out of 2%, they went from incremental targets to stretch targets. And they ended up building 2 enormous anaerobic digesters at their distilleries in Scotland, which took the spent mash from the distilling process and processed it into clean energy for the plants, and also helped treat that material, so it required less treatment later on. And the sustainability director at the time told me that that wouldn't have happened if they hadn't gone for this sort of incremental thinking to those strategic thinking. But that takes leadership. Yeah. So that's one of the examples in the book that I always come back to even after all these years.
It'd be interesting, and I'll ask you sort of midway through what your thoughts are behind the SME versus large businesses, the pros and cons, sort of challenges and opportunities on that side to it. I'd like to first understand from my point of view why you do what you do. Why did you start doing what you're doing, and where's the passion from?
Well, like a lot of people, I long had an interest in the environment, but it was kind of separate to my sort of academic career, career in educational in engineering. Because in the early 90s, when I went to university, if you want to do environmental engineering, you were talking about sewage treatment. You weren't talking about, designing pollution out of systems and et cetera, et cetera. So I was actually a green officer at the Students' Union when I was at university and studying engineering, but I never saw the two converging. And after working for a few years post-university, my partner and I decided to take a career break. And we ended up teaching English in Murmansk in Arctic Russia, of all places.
Oh.
And there is a point to this anecdote, I will end the story. But one weekend we were taken out of Murmansk and away for a weekend away in the countryside. And we went through this town called Monchegorsk, which ironically means beautiful place in the local Sami indigenous language. But I say ironic because downwind of its nickel smelter, there was just nothing alive. It was devastation. I've never seen anything like it. And when I got out of the car to take a photograph, and this is one I use in all my presentations, I could taste the acid in the air from the nickel smelter, from the sulfur emissions. And there was something about that moment. And, when we get on to talking about change and things like that, a visceral experience can be a massive driver for change. And I could see that the problem wasn't so much one of ecology and a lot of the jobs at the time, the environmental movement. The problem was the nickel smelter, and that was an engineering problem. So when I came back to the UK, and you can tell from my accent, I'm not a Geordie, but my partner is. So we settled in the northeast, and I got a job at Newcastle University at the Engineering Design Centre on the Design for a Clean Environment project. And I was basically paid for 2 years to re-educate myself in bringing those two strands of my interest together, sustainability and engineering. And then from there, when that contract was sort of running towards an end, an opportunity came up at Teesside University. They got some funding in for the Clean Environment Management Centre. And I was appointed as its first employee. We built that up to a team of 14 people over the next 6 years. And that was, even though it was at the university, it wasn't doing much. We did a little bit of research and we didn't do much teaching, but it was mainly working with industry and Teesside. So I then got 6 years of trying to implement what I'd learnt at Newcastle properly in business. After 6 years of that and a written off car on the A19, I decided that I would set up my own business. And that's where Terra Infirma came almost exactly 20 years ago. So I've been doing that ever since, which I love because I can write books if I want to write books. I can deliver sustainability in whichever way I see fit and somebody will pay me to do. Unlike we were always working with public funds, so you had to do this and that. And, even if you solved a problem in 15 minutes for an organization, it wouldn't count because you had to give them 5 days support and all that sort of stuff. And I got tired of doing all that because the tail was wagging the dog a lot. So I love the freedom of being able to do what I want to do. Obviously, if any of your listeners are self-employed, they will know the peaks and troughs of business. There are different stresses and strains, but yeah, I absolutely love it. And when I look back, there's a lot of changes that through those organizations that we've managed to implement in business for the better.
Yeah, and good for you for putting your passion and your experience together to do something which is betters the planet and betters people's around. And I think I'm quite interested in that because you've obviously had an experience which has led you to do what you do. I think the new generation are more in tune with sustainability and more in tune with green and but I think there's almost like a generation before that which still probably feels like it's a tick box exercise. For people who potentially are stuck in that and feels it's something they should do but perhaps aren't there, why should people care about this?
Well, that's the first question I ask all my clients. I ask them the question, why should you care about it? Because there's lots of answers, and I want to understand what it means to them. And for different sectors, it's different drivers. So we often talk about the business case for sustainability, and people suggest it's just one thing, but it's different for different sectors. So if you're working in, say you're working in the motor supply chain, you make widgets for internal combustion engines, then the shift to EVs that we're seeing around the world now, and the accelerating shift towards EVs, is going to give you a real challenge because it may mean that you're redundant. You know, you could become a blockbuster in the days of Netflix. Whereas if you're working in, say, a web design company, having an environmental and social cause may be more about attracting the best talent, because survey after survey show that people want purpose in their lives. So you really got to understand, you know, are you trying to cut costs? Are you trying to win more contracts? Are you trying to keep relevant in a transitioning economy? Are you trying to attract employees? And those are all quite different parts of your strategy. So that's the fundamental question I ask at the start of an engagement with one of my clients. Because one of the principles I work on is there's a sweet spot between the interests of the business and sustainability. And if you get that right, you get those win-win solutions that are good for the planet and good for the business. And counterintuitively, there was a movement, and you still hear it occasionally, that people will say, oh, organization X only did that because their customers wanted it, therefore it's greenwash. And I hate that attitude. I get quite angry about it in a way, because if the market is demanding change for sustainability and you deliver on it, that's not greenwash. That's part of the transition. That's you responding to the circumstances around you. And the idea that you should deliberately damage your company on behalf of sustainability just seems like a non-starter, because you're going to punish the people who make change and not reward them. So it's finding that sweet spot, as I say, is the very first question I ask businesses, because it is different from business to business, organization to organization.
Yeah, and thank you for that. It's an excellent answer, and you're absolutely right, because each business will have different goals and motives. But I think I guess what's interesting, and what I imagine you find interesting about your work, is that if leaders have an open forum or a discussion internally with their business, let's say there's 10 people in that senior management team, I bet they've all got different motivations and factors behind them, which I guess is important to hone in and find some form of common ground with that.
Yeah. Yeah. The other reason why I ask the question is a bit of a psychological trick, which is if by answering it, the people around the table, particularly if they're senior, are selling sustainability to themselves.
Yeah.
Whereas I could put up a PowerPoint slide, and say, here's the reasons why you should change. And their immediate reaction, well, you can say that, but you don't know the pressures we're under, et cetera, et cetera. And you know, but they won't take it on board. So actually digging through some of those motivations and understanding is the first part of culture change for me.
Yeah.
It's the very first step. So I'm quite happy to take 20 or 30 minutes over that, instead of, you know, 2 minutes reading out bullet points on a PowerPoint slide.
So I imagine that the importance of involving the team is crucial because I think a lot of mistakes I've seen is businesses have gone, we need to do this, and that probably haven't gone through the exercise you just mentioned there. They haven't thought of why they need to do this. They've just said we need to do that, and they've either taken one person internally or actually have brought someone externally just to go and do that, but not necessarily involve the team. And then people see that as an add-on to their business, or that's not my problem. Is that the step change when you see the companies that sort of change the culture, I guess, to do that?
Yeah, well, uh, culture eats strategy for breakfast is the famous quote. It's attributed to Peter Drucker, but like all these things, if you dig into the quote, it's not quite clear whether he actually said that or not. But
It
I
works though, yeah,
a,
yeah.
a good slogan, whichever. And it's absolutely true because you can have all the glossy pieces of paper you want setting out strategies and stuff, but people aren't bought in, they nothing will change. You'll just get business as usual because most of the decisions we make in our day we make by default. We do things by habit, and the same applies at work. So a lot of the work I do is try and find ways to disrupt that business as usual and try and get the thinking separate. But you make another great point, which is delegating down to somebody, and environmental managers and sustainability managers typically have very little authority to change
Mhm.
anything.
Yeah.
They're often given lots of responsibility, including keeping the boss out of jail, in case of a pollution incident or something like that. But they have very little authority. And one of the other things that's really important to do is to make sure you're aligning responsibility and authority. And that's why I always propose that you should delegate responsibility down through the reporting structure rather than sort of creating a green silo, a sustainability department who are meant to influence the whole rest of the organization, just through charm. Or even worse, sustainability champions who are often frontline volunteers. And I've heard again and again them being given KPIs, and you just go, how can you give a volunteer a KPI? Give it to somebody's job it is to deliver on the KPI,
Yeah.
whose bonus or whose promotion prospects or anything else. Use that structure because that's what it's there for. So yeah, you're absolutely right. There's often a disconnect between the intention and the actual who's got the authority to make change happen.
Yeah, brilliant. I think, and this might be my opinion, but it is my opinion, but I saw a real movement 4 or 5 years ago where a lot of the conversations I was having, with seeing leaders were about sustainability. The things were moving, people talking about their scope 1, 2, and 3. And I've seen I've seen a reduction of conversations regarding it. I've seen a bit of people putting on ice. Now, I imagine that's coincided with the world getting pretty tough and business getting tough, but have you noticed that?
Definitely in the media and in the sort of public narrative.
Yeah.
Uh, you hear bits and pieces in the press about industry, but if you actually dig into that, quite often this is the fossil fuel sector has made various moves over the decades towards a more sustainable energy future, and then come back and decided, no, we're doing oil and gas. And that's regarded as somehow backtracking and sustainability, but the oil and gas industry does oil and gas.
Yeah.
That's it's sort of putting Dracula in charge of the blood bank and all that sort of thing. That's that's what their raison d'etre is. And but it's really interesting to see how other organizations are finding it. And there was a big hoo-ha, I think it was last year when HSBC, they'd set a net zero by 2030 target. And then they realized that there simply weren't enough zero carbon office blocks in the world for them to occupy to hit that target. It's clear then that they set that target without thinking through the timing of the target, because there's very much a sort of Goldilocks zone of the timing of targets. You have to leave enough time to actually make the change happen. And that could be in capital investment projects, which are going to take years to design, commission, and before they're actually ready to use. But you don't want the target too far away that it's somebody else's problem.
Yeah.
So there's a real art to that target setting. And a lot of this sort of backtracking is people realizing their initial target that they might have gone at in a sort of quite a gung ho way was just unrealistic. So if understanding the business case is the first step, I suppose the second step is understanding realistically where you are in terms of addressing the subject, because not everything's under your control. And I don't know, maybe HSBC is big and powerful enough that they could commission office blocks, but even that's going to take many, many years for them to have these to move into. So that's a challenge in itself. But the I would, going back to your original question, is it slowing down? I think people are starting to realize that push is coming to shove, and that what they said would happen really easily isn't happening so easy. It's tough. They have to make these decisions. They have to make changes. They have to have winners and losers. It was a quote I read this week was somebody said, in any change, there's winners and losers, and the losers pick up the phone to the government. So, and we can see that going back to the auto industry. We can see that with the debate over the EV mandate and whether it should be diluted. But at the minute, the auto industry is meeting the EV mandate, and if they do dilute it, there's an argument that they'll simply be penalising the people who have taken it seriously and made the changes, and rewarding the laggards.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure people might be screaming at me for that, saying that, but there's a certain amount of that, and there's a lot of misinformation going about at the minute, and a lot of it is paid misinformation. So there was a case of a PR company winning a prize for spreading doubt about heat pumps, and this has happened, for decades in different sectors. Whether when Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring about the effects of DDT in 1961, there was immediately an industry sprung up to try and persuade us all that Rachel Carson was wrong and that we could use DDT, and if we didn't, everybody would die of malaria and all this stuff. And it went through smoking and lung disease. It's gone through lots of other issues. There's always a pushback from vested interests. So a lot of the noise is coming from those vested interests, and there's money being pumped into both PR companies and political parties to try and resist that change. That's perfectly normal, and I see it as a sign of success. We're sort of hitting the steeper bit of the S curve of change, and some people are starting to get very uncomfortable. But if that wasn't happening, we probably wouldn't be trying hard enough.
Apologies for interrupting this episode with a very quick announcement about my business. Theo James are a specialist talent provider specifically to the manufacturing and engineering sector. I am incredibly proud of what we've achieved since our inception in 2015. We specialise in roles from semi-skilled trades right the way up to our TJ exec search arm of the business, both on the contract and permanent side. We offer both bespoke one-off campaigns for hard-to-fill roles or a full partnership service where we become an extension of your business. For any information, please get in touch with me or the team. I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. Thank you. I think it's interesting. I think if you look at manufacturing as well, manufacturing engineering, big challenges right now, and obviously energy costs being up there with the number one. And I think it gets back to what you said previously about understanding why they're doing what they're doing, because actually a legitimate and fair reason for an engineering company could be cost saving. And potentially, I imagine when people get into these projects, they don't realize the cost savings that can be had from even the smallest changes as well, I presume.
Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting sort of psychology in this, because I'll give you an example. I was running a workshop for a group of manufacturers at the start of this year, and somebody asked the question, will net zero cost your business money? And everybody nodded. And I said, well, hold on a minute. This was halfway through. We'd already been talking about energy for a long time. And I said, hold on a minute. You've just been telling me about how much money you've been saving through all these measures like LED lighting or reducing the pressure in your compressed air systems, even solar power purchase agreements, PPAs, all saving you money. And they said, yeah, but we did that to save money, not for net zero. And they'd kind of divided measures that would cut carbon emissions into net zero being the ones that cost you money and the others being ones you would do as normal business.
Uh-huh.
Now, I'd argue again that's very short sighted and it creates this negativity about net zero because if you look at the transition costs, you can save a huge amount of money. You could use some of that to invest in the slightly less economically advantageous measures that might do you well to keep your customers happy or keep your employees happy and that kind of thing. And then it's quite a small number of measures that are actually going to cost a large amount of money that you won't see any direct investment back. But even then, I've come across many examples of where people have done measures that aren't going to save them money, and it's done them really well in terms of competitiveness
Yeah.
because people are looking at the business and saying, this is a good business, they're taking this seriously. They're part of our carbon footprint. So if we use them as a supplier, then our carbon footprint shrinks. And these things are quite difficult because it's hard to quantify that. It's very easy to, or relatively easy to do a simple cost benefit analysis of, we install this bit of kit and it's going to cost us X hundreds of thousands of pounds, but it's going to save us X tens of thousands of pounds every year. So we get a return investment in so many years. All of that's easy, but in terms of actually winning new business or attracting employees or staying relevant when the economy's changing, those are very hard to quantify.
Yeah.
That they don't fit neatly into a spreadsheet, and that's where it can get difficult.
Which I think is it kind of brings you on to the SME versus large corporate debate because and just when you were talking there, I was thinking, well, a lot of, are you in a strong position if you're an SME or a large corporate? Because I imagine there's pros and cons and different ways to answer that. But I know a lot of our clients have the issue now where they're perhaps tendering for some work, and let's say it's Rolls Royce, let's say it's a big prime, it's a big organization, and they might now look at their scope three, their supply chain, and go, if you are going to tender or supply to us, you must be X, Y, and Z. So you must adhere to this. Otherwise, you can't apply. That's quite easy for a big business to do because they've got loads and loads of companies and want to work with them. Not so easy, I guess, for a smaller company who's perhaps can't afford to do that. Where does that sort of balance come into it in terms of being a pro or a con for that?
Yeah. I always push back against the sort of poor SME
Yeah,
line because what I find with SMEs is they're so agile
yeah,
that they can turn in a sixpence when larger organizations are still producing strategy reports. The levers of power are connected to the to the controls by very short cables, so stuff can just get done. And one of my favorite case studies that it's not a manufacturing company, but it was a distributor of tourist leaflets in Scotland, and their boss, chief executive, was just really passionate. So even before feed-in tariffs and things emerged, he installed a wind turbine at his facility, and he never expected it to do anything other than make him feel that he was doing the right thing. But some of the Scottish quangos give 30% of tender scores to sustainability. Usually it's 10 or 15%, but some of these were up to 30%. And leaflet delivery is sort of a low margin, difficult to differentiate yourself type business. And the feedback he got from one successful tender was on sustainability, everybody else put in a policy, you put in a picture of your wind turbine. So he just flattened them. Uh, and another small business of all people is a small family-run paint company in Belgium. They did all sorts of fascinating things, and they had a people and planet fund. that came from a proportion of profits that then a panel of employees could decide how they're going to spend. So the first solar panels they put on the roof of the business were paid through the People and Planet Fund because they weren't expecting to make a return on it. But then, as the economics of solar changed and some of the government incentives in Belgium changed, they covered the entire factory in solar panels because then made economic sense. But then the People and Planet Fund was funding other things, and it was anything from bike maintenance through to fresh fruit for employees in the factory, as healthy employees make a better business and all that kind of thing. So I haven't seen a funding mechanism as clever as that anywhere else, and I think it's because it's a small business, and the boss knows everybody's name, and they just if he wants to do something, they just work out how to do it, give it a go. If it doesn't work, they stop doing it, and if it does work, they keep doing it. And the freedom I think to change is quite refreshing in a small business. That's obviously the upside. There's downsides in terms of trying to find money for capital investment, or the fact that if you're a small business, a lot of your suppliers can be massively bigger than you are. So you can't just turn around and say to them, "We want you to reduce your emissions to cut our footprint in the same way," because they'll go, "Who are you again?"
Yeah,
But,
yeah. Hmm.
so there are challenges and things, but I think that agility gives SMEs a real opportunity to innovate and do things differently, and big businesses can learn a lot from small businesses.
I completely agree. Which is, I know you mentioned Blockbuster right at the start. A key example of a business you just never ever think would go the way they did. It was everyone was at Blockbuster on a Friday night when you were, well, you certainly were if you were my age. It was just
Yeah.
the thing, wasn't it? But they couldn't pivot that quick.
Yeah, and I learned recently they had the opportunity to buy Netflix and
Really.
when it was really cheap, and decided not to go down that line. Because I remember when Netflix and Love Film, I think we
Remember the film?
subscribed to
Yeah,
Love Film rather than
yeah.
Netflix, but you went online and you booked a movie and they sent it
Got the
to you through the
CDs. Yeah,
post,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
uh, and then you sent it back again, and but because they had the catalog online, then they were able to pivot into streaming these movies instead. And yeah, and that's the sort of existential threat. And we've seen in almost every big change, we've seen a lot of big names fall by the wayside. And I think the low carbon one will be the same. The question is whether those companies can pivot properly from what they're doing today to what they want to do. And, you know, a lot of, again, when you read the narrative in the press, it's very simplistic, because when we're talking about EV mandates and stuff, they almost assume that brand X can decide, this week we're going to produce 50% EVs and the 50% internal combustion engines, and next week we'll go to 55% EVs. But it doesn't work like that, because if you want to build EVs, you need to retool the factory, which means shutting down for 6 months or longer. And then you're not producing anything, so you're not selling anything. So it's a massive change. You need the supply chain. And we've seen here in the northeast of England an EV supply chain build up around Nissan, which they need because it's not, it's a completely different car. And the Leaf is starting to roll off the production line now. So it's not a trivial change. And it's very interesting, I think, this announcement of a joint venture with one of
Japanese
Chinese
vehicles.
EV manufacturers
Yes, yeah.
to use some of the capacity.
Hmm.
And I think that could be a way forward, because then those companies are maximizing the use of those suppliers who have co-located with them. There will almost certainly be an exchange in ideas and expertise, and it just helps the process along and keeps manufacturing jobs in the northeast, rather than them all being outsourced, and offshored to China, because there's a very big risk that that's what will happen, is we just end up importing even more goods and making even less stuff here. So that's a very interesting development, I think, and maybe one that other people could learn from.
Hmm.
I haven't, obviously, it's it's only on intention and memorandums of understanding, that sort of thing now. So we don't have any insight to how well it'll work, but I do think that's an interesting way of moving forward.
Yeah, yeah, same. I was surprised, fascinated, and pleased probably when I saw that for exactly every reason you've just outlined. And I think what you said there is absolutely key. Is that it's that shared knowledge because it's always for decades it's been us versus them, and what will and been fear that China will do X, Y, and Z, and they have accelerated pretty much every market in manufacturing for a long, long time now. So why not pull together and share the knowledge and the expertise that both have got? Exactly what you said. The Northeast has a perfect, perfect supply chain, readily available, but massive challenges. So I think I was surprised to see it, but I was really pleased to see it because I just think it's exactly what it needs. It's a clever move, probably one they needed to make. I think, in all honesty, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, we could just lose manufacturing, which is always, particularly politically, is very, very difficult. But that's the problem when you've got change. The original one I think was when the transistor appeared on the scene. As I understand it, none of the old valve manufacturers survived that.
Hmm.
All the transistor companies were new startups. And as I think I mentioned Kodak earlier. They invented digital photography and then decided not to exploit it, and then that technology came to consume them. Netflix and Blockbuster we've talked about, and even I found out recently that ExxonMobil were early innovators in lithium-ion batteries.
Right.
So they may have done a Kodak. They may have created their own nemesis
The sliding door
that will
moments,
come
isn't
and
it?
destroy their market in the future. History repeats itself and all that, but that's a very interesting concept. But again, you know, BYD started off as a battery manufacturer, so they make some hybrid cars now, but they've never been a legacy internal combustion engine manufacturer, and that's a real threat to legacy manufacturers, is people coming in who have always set up to do the new thing rather than the
Yeah.
old thing, and they don't have to make the transition. So yeah, hopefully these joint ventures will help smooth over some of those issues, because as I said before, in any change there will be winners and losers, and there'll be a lot of political pressure from the losers
Yeah.
and other allies to to say, oh, this is terrible, look at all the downsides, but of course they'll never mention the upsides.
I couldn't get you on here and not ask this question. So if people listen to this, and let's say this person is a senior leader, owner, director, someone in the business which a responsibility, manufacturing business, SME, let's say 200 staff, and they have started the journey. They maybe were well on with it. Maybe they've sort of paused things last few years, but listen, is going. We need to get back on track. What would be, if you're working with that business, what would be the initial 90-day plan? What would be the first things you would look at to make sure they would need to start getting where they need to be?
Well, as I said, first of all, get the business case spin down, because everything else will build from that, and then work out a long-term strategy, because most sustainability strategies I see are action plans rather than sustainability strategies. And I use a technique called backcasting, which is very simple but really, really powerful. So, again, with key decision makers, we will define what the organization would look like if they met all their targets at whatever future date they have set. And then we work backwards to today to decide what they have to start doing today to get on the right trajectory to meet that. And it's interesting, again, I mentioned psychology before, but it's interesting the psychology of this, because it's actually a lot of fun, because you can let your imagination run wild, sometimes too wild. After you're not going to have solar powered hover cars by 2040, you know so you have to sometimes pull it back a little bit, but it gets people away from what we call the tyranny of the present, which is all those short-term factors. And you mentioned, business has been quite hard of recent years, and every so often we have a downturn and upturn and all the rest of it. And it's very easy to let those factors stop you doing stuff. Whereas I find because you're so forward looking using backcasting that it tends to leap all that, and you get the balls rolling to make those longer term judgments. Those are, backcasting tends to do the big changes. There is still a role for quick wins, and some of those things that I was talking about before, like just getting power purchase agreement where somebody else pays to put solar panels on your on your factory roof, and they take some of the money and give you some of the money, or give you some of the power free, or whatever the agreement is. Those quick wins show progress in the meantime. And I think it's very context dependent. So if you have compressed air on site, for a lot of manufacturers, that's 30 to 40% of their energy bill. And I think people manage compressed air much better now than 20 years ago when I started the company, because I had a contract to go around and look for quick wins, and compressed air was always the banker that I went to first, because you had, you could just hear the escaping air through leaks, and often the pressure was too high and they didn't have a cold air input, so it was breathing in its own exhaust and working very inefficiently and all these things. It was all very simple stuff to fix, and you could save a huge amount of money straight up. Now I think that's improving, because people are now talking about 4-bar factory, and the typical compressed air system works at 6 to 8 bars. So compressing air just to 4 bars saves a huge amount of money in itself. And that's a concept I wasn't hearing 20 years ago. There's a much more of a focus on it. So there's a lot of stuff you can do around sort of good management of the assets you have to start reducing those energy costs. And then you can demonstrate both internally and externally that you're making some progress while you're working on the longer term things that backcasting gives you. So it's sort of a twin track issue. And quick wins are very important for employees, because if they see you declaring you're going to be net zero by 2040 or 2050, and they know that you're wasting huge amounts of energy and doing nothing about it, or even disposable cutlery in the canteen, it's cognitive dissonance. So you need to get those little things right as well, because those are the things people understand.
Yeah, 100%. And look, thank you for this. It's been fascinating, and that what you just said there, they're tangible changes people can make tomorrow, and that's amazing. But actually, one of my biggest takeaways personally from all of this today is that yes, we're talking about sustainability, but we actually could be talking about anything. What you're talking about is leadership and transformational change, and I think right what you said right at the start, and really interesting to hear all the classic examples like you brought, but because it's really important to remember those, because sometimes you forget. But actually, take everything back to understand why you should do something, and that has to be bespoke and authentic to you as a leader and use a business, and to involve the staff in that, to really understand it. That in itself creates a reason to change, because without a reason to change, why people, we always need a what's in it for them. Otherwise, what's the point? They won't get involved. And I think that for me is personally my biggest takeaway when I think about how we do things here in the business, that a lot of changes we make because we feel we should or we need to make them. But why? What's the advantage and what's the disadvantage of not doing it? And I think there'll be loads of little nuggets there people take away. But actually, I think this episode will just give people confidence that there's lots of stuff they can change tomorrow, but it needs to come from the leadership team. But actually, it all comes from the staff as well. So thank you. It's been fascinating. It really has. What's the best way? Obviously, please tell us briefly about your book and your podcast. The best way to contact you. What's the easiest?
Yeah. Well, the website's www.terrainfirma.co.uk, a name I chose before I ever had to spell it out to people online or anything. The I host the Net Zero Business podcast, which comes out every Friday. That's posted to the blog, which is on the website, and you can sign up to our newsletters and things there. There's other free resources, including our monthly newsletter and some extracts from books and other white papers and publications. So there's all kinds of things there to dig into. I post a blog about, one of them's the podcast, so 2 other blogs a week at least. On LinkedIn a lot, probably too much. So it's pretty easy to track me down. But yeah, if you are interested in learning more about this, please do get in touch.
Amazing. Thanks, Gareth. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening or watching this episode of the Manufacturing Leaders podcast. Please just like or subscribe. It really helps grow the show and obviously improve the industry. If you want any more information about Theo James, as I mentioned midway through the episode, please get in touch with me or the team. I would love to talk about how it can help you directly or your business. We are more than just a recruiter, and I know people say that, but it's something I'm incredibly passionate about. We are in business for much more than just a bums on seats approach. We want to help people grow. We want to help improve their lives. And ultimately, I want to work with businesses and people who share the same values as we do. And that's something I'm incredibly passionate about. So please, if that is you and you are passionate about that dream role or passionate about your people, please get in touch with me or the team. I would absolutely love to talk a bit more detail. Thank you very much. Speak soon.